Hey, what's going on, guys? This is your boy C. Will back to you with another video. Super excited today. Why? Because we have Spider-Man remastered for the PC. Yep. Yeah. This is a big one right here, especially for, from all my PC players, my PC gamers out there, which I'm PC first, console second. But this is a huge one. Sony has released one of their big boys to the scene, and yeah, this is going to be a big one. But before we get started, man, this is your first time here, welcome. Here we do everything tech, all things tech, whatever it is, we like to do it. And if you're a returning viewer, I appreciate you the most because you keep everything going. So without further ado, let's get going. Spider-Man Remastered PC. Now this, just on PlayStation, has sold over 33 million copies. Yes, 33 million copies. And it is crazy. That's a lot. That's like a lot. I have this on my PlayStation 5. I bought it as a bundle with Miles Morales when the PS5, when I first got it. So if you want to check out one of my unboxings, yeah, you can do that. Just hit the link somewhere across the way. But man, I've done a lot of stuff with my PS5, and yeah, I'm excited to be able to add this. Yes, I am going to buy this game again. I know I already have it, but I want to buy it on PC. Why? Because on PC, this gives you the opportunity to be able to run the game like you want it. And that's what I love about PC gaming. You can run the game whatever resolution, frame rate, ray tracing, all this different type of stuff. So this is another episode of Can Your PC Run It? Haven't done one of these in a while, but I'm glad we get back to it. So let's take a look at some of the actual specs that's needed in order to be able to get this thing started. So as you can see here, we have the minimum recommended, very high, amazing ray tracing, and then ultimate ray tracing. Now, ultimate ray tracing, yeah, okay. Yeah, so average performance over here on the left, the graphics presets, the GPU, CPU, RAM, OS, and storage. So minimum, it says minimum on the left-hand side. It says that we can start off with 720p at 30 frames per second. Now, I don't know. That's crazy. I don't know. Now, I'm not stepping on any toes. I always say if you're going to play PC gameplay, you want to start off at least 1080p resolution, 60 frames per second. I wouldn't do anything less than that. But 720p, 30 frames per second, graphics preset low. You need at least an NVIDIA GTX 950 or AMD equivalent. Intel Core i3 or AMD equivalent, 8 gigabytes of RAM, Windows 10, 75 gigabyte hard drive. So when they say minimum, that really is the minimum. I wouldn't even look at that. So we're not going to look at that. So let's start off with recommended. Now recommended, they're saying 1080p, 60 frames per second, graphics preset medium. Now we're talking about a GTX 1060, 6 gigabytes, or an AMD Radeon RX 580, which that's actually still a really good card. We have a lot of people that are still using RX 580s and GTX 1060s. And so, yeah, those are still pretty good, especially for 1080p. Intel Core i5 or Ryzen 5 1600. Still good for entry level gameplay, 1080p, 16 gigabytes of RAM, Windows 10, 64-bit. And then we have 75 gigabyte SSD. It's weird that they kind of put a SSD with the recommended 1080p 60, but that makes sense. Especially for the frame rate, if you don't want to have too many hitches when it comes to the game. So now we move on to very high. So very high specs in the middle. We have 4K 60 frames per second. Woo woo. And then we have very high graphics preset. Then now, here's where it starts to get a little bit interesting. Because I think for the most part, okay, let's just get through it. So you have NVIDIA RTX 3070, and then, or you have a Radeon RX 6800 XT. Now I'm gonna stop here for a second because this looks very weird. So RTX 3070 does not match up with a RX 6800 XT. The 6800 XT is a lot more powerful than the 3070 when it comes to rasterization performance. So, everything outside of ray tracing. So it's weird that they have, because this is 4K 60, and we know the 3070, saying it's pretty strong, but it's weird that they have a matchup with 6800 XT. Not for sure where that's coming from, but okay. And then for the CPU, we have a Core i5 11400. So we got the 11 gen up against the Ryzen 5 3600. I actually have the Ryzen 5 3600. It's a great gaming chip. 6 cores, 12 threads. I don't use it. I actually have it sitting on my shelf. Then we have 16 gigabytes of RAM, Windows 10, then the actual storage, 75 gigabyte SSD. So that none of that stuff changes. So again, the combination. So what this tells me, being able to run this game at 4K 60 frames per second, I'm assuming it doesn't talk about ray tracing on this particular middle chart. So this is just basically hardcore. So this is actually pretty good. Now I'm wondering whether or not, especially for the 3070, you know, if this is going to include DLSS. Doesn't say anything about it, but I'm just wondering. But again, this is just a straight 4K 60 frames per second. So we're probably good with that, you know, with the 3070. Definitely with the 1600 XT. So if you have a setup that's like this, you're going to be able to run this game like it's nothing. So it's going to be pretty cool. Now, when we start to get into the ray tracing and ultimate ray tracing, it starts to get a little bit more interesting. So it says amazing ray tracing, average performance, 1440p, 60 frames per second, or 4K at 30 frames per second. I could do very high settings, 4K 60, or I could do 4K 30 with ray tracing. I would rather have this fast-paced game. I would rather have 4K 60 than 4K 30. I wouldn't need the ray tracing. But let's just say that you want to do ray tracing. So you'll be running the actual graphics preset is high, ray tracing high. Then it says you're going to need a RX 3070, which is the same thing that's needed for 4K 60 without ray tracing, or a RX 6900 XT. Now, I don't know. I'm just not sure where this is coming from. Okay. 6900 XT. Now, I do know for AMD cards, they don't do so well with ray tracing. So maybe I can understand this for the ray tracing point, but I can't understand it for the 4K 60, you know, 1600 XT. I don't know. This is weird. But 6900 XT, I can understand for ray tracing because AMD is a little bit behind NVIDIA when it comes to ray tracing. But what gets me is the RTX 3070 to be able to run ray tracing 1440p, 60 frames per second, or 4K 30. So what this is probably telling me is that DLSS or AMD FSR is probably being used somewhere up in this situation. I know it doesn't say it, so I can't wait for the game to actually come out so we could be able to test it. But I'm definitely thinking that somewhere in here, we're going to be using that. So we have a CPU upgrade. So now the Core i5 11600K, 6 cores, 12 threads, or a Ryzen 7 3700X, which is weird. Okay. So, because that's 8 cores. So it's a little weird. And then nothing else changes. And then so for the ultimate ray tracing, this is for the creme de la creme. We have 4K 60 graphics preset high, very high for ray tracing. So we going full balls to the wall. Then NVIDIA RTX 3080 makes sense. So that makes sense. A 3080. So this is full ray tracing at 4K, 60 frames per second, which I'm thinking probably it'll be interesting whether or not this includes DLSS. Probably not because they're capping us out at 4K 60. So going back to the 1440p at 60 frames per second, this probably doesn't include DLSS, but it's going to be interesting to see if it does. But it's, hey, RTX 3080 or 3080 is still a great performing card. A lot of titles you could do 4K 60. Now with ray tracing, and that's a little different. So, you know, I'm thinking it's probably going to have a little bit of help, you know, when it comes to the DLSS and AMD FSR. Now we're talking about Core i7 12700K. That's the new 12th gen for Intel, and then you have the AMD Ryzen 9 5900X, which is a 12-core chip, which is interesting because it's saying that, hey, you need a 12-core chip to run a 4K 60 ray tracing title. First time seeing that. So that is a little weird that they're doing that. That's like, beast mode. Now, I have a 5800X and a 3080 Ti. You would think that they would kind of up themselves. Oh, and then I forgot. They're saying a Radeon RX 6950 XT. Now, let me explain the reason. It's the same reason for the amazing ray tracing versus the ultimate ray tracing. AMD is behind when it comes to ray tracing. So the 6950 XT is their top of the line card for AMD. So I can understand why they're using that. But the CPUs is what's throwing me off. And they also bumping it up to 32 gigs, which I have. Windows 10, 64-bit. I actually have Windows 11. And then a 75 gigabyte SSD. So this is weird, man. I'm trying to tell you, like, if you want to run this game to the top, like right now, your PS5 cannot run this game 4K 60 native. Okay? It just can't. It does with the PS5, it does a render resolution, at a different resolution, so you can, but it then it converts, and so, but you can't do 4K 60 with full ray tracing on a PS5. Only on PC where you can be able to do this. Here are the specs for it. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. This gets released it's available August the 12th, which is right around the corner in just a couple more weeks. You can be able to get this on Epic Games or on Steam. And let me know down in the comments what you think. Are you going to pick up Spider-Man? Do you have a PS5? Have you played this before? The game is amazing. And I definitely like to do a comparison. The top of the line, all of the graphic settings set up on high on the PS5 versus what we have it set up on the PC. And so let me know. Again, it seems like the specs are like really, really high for this game. You got different spectrums of, what you're, depending on your PC, your graphics card, your CPU and stuff like that. So you could definitely be able to play this game. I can recommend that you do it at least 1080p, 60 frames per second. But if you want to take full advantage of this game, 4K 60, ray tracing high, then you definitely going to need some beast mode specs. And this is going to be interesting. So, man, I appreciate you for watching the video all the way to the end. Definitely let me know what you think down in the comments below. And I'll see you in the next episode of Can Your PC Run It? Peace.